wanted to ask you, Sophie, is because you've been writing and publishing for a long time, you've seen, a lot of changes and ups and downs in the publishing world. Uh, I know there's a lot of other writers watching this, established writers and emerging writers. So I'm wondering if you could maybe give a bit of insight to them, for them, about what are the challenges or the downsides or tricky hurdles that you might have had to overcome yourself personally, or else that you've just witnessed in the publishing and writing world. What are some of the sort of challenges or tougher moments sort of been in a long writing career?
Yeah, well, look, I think that writing, like any art form, has always been difficult
Yeah.
to get into, but also to maintain the career. And I think that it's especially difficult. I mean, it's always been difficult to maintain a career in writing, but it's more difficult now in some ways. I think it's no harder to get published. It's as hard as it's always been. And in fact, there was a period when, like about 20 years ago or 15 years ago, when publishers weren't really open to submissions. It was really hard to get into, but now they've sort of got these online submission things which make it a little bit more possible than it used to be, to actually get even get not even to get first base, but to even just get a tiny get close to the entrance door, if you
Yeah.
know what I mean. So, I think getting the first book out is no harder or easier than it's ever been. It's always been hard. And, there has always been people, who, had millions of rejections before they got anywhere at all. And if you look at, I have a thing where an exercise books that I used to write when I started off. I would write down the title of something I was sending out and when I sent it and what the result was.
Yeah.
And if you look down the column, you see rejection, 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 and suddenly accepted, and then rejection, 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 and so on. Like it was like honestly, the strike rate was pretty low. But then, like I said, I had those two stories published, short stories in books. I'd had a couple of things published in newspapers because newspapers used to publish short stories. And there's another reason why some things are harder to maintain a career because of the fate of the media, of the print media, of newspapers. It's harder to get the exposure. It's harder to get reviews. It's also harder to earn any freelance money writing for newspapers. You know, Fortunately, there are still like magazines like Magpies, which
Mhm.
do publish writers, even emerging writers. Of course, it's nonfiction, it's interviews, it's reviews, etc. But that also helps to feed your CV or record. And that's how I
Yeah.
started, really writing things about other people's work. I did a lot of interviews like you do,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was really great. There were more outlets at the time, but it wasn't, I mean, newspapers didn't take those sort of things because they just like now, they weren't interested in children's literature, So it was the specialist ones who were interested. And that's why Magpies is such an enormous, wonderful thing that we still have on the scene. But yeah, so it was like I say, it was no more difficult, no more easy. The novel that was taken up, the first one novel that was taken up, was like the third one I had written. No, in fact, the fourth one, if you count my unfinished teenage novel. And the other two have never seen the light of day and never will. So it's just that it took me years and years to get to that level. And sure, I was in my 20s when that happened. I was, when I first got finally I sent off the manuscript to UQP when I was like 27, 20, yeah, 27, because I remember I started writing it when my second child was born, like a week after he was born. I sort of think, I've got to do this. And and I was 27. So, Yeah. But it took them like now I'm 28. I was 28 and a half, nearly, you know, going towards 29 by the time they said yes. So it took a long time. In that time, I wrote Fire in the Sky as well and stuff. So um, it's so I was 29, just still 29 when House in the Rainforest was published, and 30 when just 30, just turned 30 when Fire in the Sky was published. So, but all that time before, like all my teen years and my 20s, I was trying and trying to get through. Um, so, but once I was there, and with two books out in the same year, you think,
Yeah.
wow, I'm made, ah, plain sailing from now on. Boy, was I ever wrong, So it was very exciting, of course. And like with the House in the Rainforest, two people just absolutely adored that book. And it was optioned for film, for two films that never got made, of course. Straight away, like I remember, oh my God, my agent ringing, oh, you've got an option for a film. And anyway, when Fire in the Sky also was really, really well received. And so it was very exciting. Obviously, I was so excited going into the bookshops all the time to check out if my book was there, looking to see that it wasn't just by the spine that was facing
Yeah.
But I soon realized that, and even though it was like an enchanted beginning, a charmed beginning, but there was all that time leading up to it. And then after The House in Rainforest was published and Fire in the Sky, I got an email, not an email, I got a letter at the time, a beautiful letter in beautiful handwriting from the wonderful Barbara Kerr Wilson, who had just started a young adult list at UQP, who had published The House in the Rainforest. And she said to me, you've got such a good voice in the teenage voice, because it starts off with, have you ever thought of writing for young adults? Now, I had thought of writing for children and for adults, but not for the one who's in between. And I said, oh, actually, and I had popped an idea into my head straight away. And because also I was mourning my grandmother, and this was a couple of years after the House in Rainforest was published, and she had just died, and she was the one who brought me up when I was a child, and I was feeling extremely sad. And it was a kind of memorial to her in a way, even though it was set in Australia. It was nothing to do with France. It was nothing to do with a person like her, but it was set in a town rather like the town I was living in at the time in the country. And so and that was taken on straight away. I mean, I had been propositioned to write this novel, so that's pretty amazing. So things had started so well, and so I thought, oh, for sure, everything is just going to keep going up and up and up. But no, so there were quite a lot of hiccups. There were novels that were rejected. There were things that were accepted and then the contracts were abruptly cancelled. There was, and this was all, like I was a published writer, I was everything. There was all sorts of things. Then there was also editors who had loved my work at a publishing house and championed it left, and the people who were there didn't like it as much because, things are very subjective. So there was constant little ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster. And sometimes you're feeling on top of the world, and other times you're thinking, oh my God, am I ever going to be published then, sort of thing, But I just kept going, and I tend to be rather, no, I wouldn't say stoical, but I do sort of accept things quite quickly, So I think, okay, this doesn't work for this person. Maybe it'll work for this one. And I think, okay, maybe they didn't like it because of that. Maybe if I change this, or maybe I should just leave that aside and do something new. And so it's been this constant fancy footwork.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and keeping an eye out for what's out there, what's going on, how are things changing. Don't get stuck in the past. Don't lament, oh, the good old days. There's no such thing as the good old days. They never existed. They never I mean, maybe at the time of Homer they existed, you know what I mean? Like even at the time, if you look at Shakespeare's time, they were battling, fighting, struggling
Yeah.
to get their place in the sun. And it was much harder for them because there was no social welfare, nothing, you had to really claw your way up. And so basically that once you realize that, then you sort of make your peace with it. And you think, okay, how can I keep going whilst also not betraying my inner voice, not betraying myself, not betraying what I really want to do. And I think in the end, that's what I came to realize, that flexibility and integrity are key to it, so that you don't take rejection personally, which is hard because sometimes it feels intensely personal. Sometimes it's just you think, oh, well, that's business. That's the business. That's the industry. That's what it's like. Other times you think,
Yeah.
but you sort of, you just, because now I have the overview and I know that I can get through things,
Yeah.
then I am better about it. But at the same time, I never take anything for granted, because I know that it's like a kind of tightrope and you can fall off at any moment. So, I mean, but life is a tightrope itself,
Yeah.
It's like we're all walking tightrope and we don't know what's going to be on the way to the other side. We just don't know. And hopefully we'll be able to hang on there. But, you have to take precautions, as it were,
Yeah.
and not go recklessly across.
Yeah.
So it's really about that. It's about fear, and sometimes it's about thinking, okay, if I can't get this through, what can I do instead? And never losing the pleasure, the delight that you have in writing, of thinking, even if this finds only one other reader, my partner, my friend, my family, whatever, it's worth it, Uh, and there have been things like that for me, I've to a point where I think, okay, or I think there's something here that I know a publisher won't be interested, but I really want to do. And I guess in a way, that's what sort of started Christmas Press, and in another way, Partload Press as well, because they were things that we knew weren't going to, that publishers might like, but that weren't commercial enough for
Yeah.
them. So it's really about keeping that voice, that integrity, but also being flexible and looking around, seeing opportunities, even, like they say, I mean, the old cliche of when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade sort of thing. It's true. It's a cliche because it is true. Sometimes it can be hard to find the recipe for that blasted lemonade, but it's like, even if it's just a bit of a squeeze of lemon in water and a bit of sugar, then that's fine for the moment. And that might lead on to something else. So it really is about not, it's totally normal to feel down. It's totally normal to feel angry. It's totally normal to feel like you're an imposter and all that sort of thing. Everybody feels like that. But keep the pleasure in your own writing. Write for yourself above all.
Yeah.
And just have a look around. I think you're doing exactly the right thing. You're getting to know the industry really well. You're getting to know the people in it. You're getting to understand the stories. You have a genuine love of children's books. And from that, all sorts of things can emerge. And I know you're doing your own creative work, and it can seem like it's never going to happen. But then one day it does, when you least expect it. And sometimes from the most unexpected quarter as well. So I think it's important to keep that hope, um, and to act on it. There's this old Russian proverb that says, "Trust in God, but row for the shore." And that's something I've always
Love
thought
that.
of too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if that's too airy fairy as advice, but it's very much been my experience.
No, I think that's wonderful. That that is so inspiring. I feel so filled with hope and inspiration from that, from all that wisdom that's just come through from you, Sophie. And I
Oh,
know
thank
lots
you.
of writers watching this, emerging like me or
Mm,
established like you, will
mm,
feel the same way as you and
mm.
will be spurred on because that really is very inspiring. I've taken a lot away from that. So it's
That's,
important to keep hope,
yeah,
write for yourself, keep
yeah,
persisting, and
yeah.
I love what you say, find the pleasure in the writing itself and
That's
writing
right.
writing for me.
Because that's how you start,
Yeah,
that's how you start because you actually want to do it because you want to tell a story because you want to create these characters.
yeah,
And sure, you also want to give pleasure to other people with it, but first and foremost you've got to give yourself pleasure. You make yourself feel, oh my god, and when we read it afterwards you think, oh, did I really write that?
yeah.
Oh my god. It's and I have pleasure rereading even my 16-year-old novel, the novel I read as a 16-year-old,
Yeah.
because I think, this is really wow,
Yeah.
and it gives you an insight also to reread things that you've written in the past. I don't know if you've kept things from when you were a child or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it gives you an insight, which is absolutely invaluable as well, but
Mhm.
also it reminds you of the delight you had when you wrote those words down.
Yeah. I think I also get, and you might get this from, if not rereading, but maybe just seeing your previously published titles,
Mm,
is I'll look at manuscripts I wrote a few years ago or when I was a kid or a teenager, and like you say, they might seem amateurish, and I can
mm.
see how I've improved now. But I also think I wrote that. I actually finished a book,
Yes,
and
yes,
a lot of
yes.
people talk about it or want to do it or don't do it. But
Yeah,
that's an accomplishment in and of itself,
absolutely.
and that's something to be proud
Absolutely.
of. And like saying, like for example, all your books are behind me now.
Mm.
You've done it. You've done it
Yeah,
before, and even though there's tough times, you can do it again, and you are
yeah,
capable.
yeah.
And it must, I'm sure, must feel memories must come to you from seeing all your older
Oh,
books, and then the
absolutely.
delight in writing those.
Mm. Absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny because, sometimes, because when you've written as many books as I have, sometimes you forget like the names of characters in it or something
Yeah.
like that. And then you get back into it and oh my God, yes, I remember this is why I read like this, and this is where this character came from, and this is why I love this book. And sometimes I even find myself reading as if it was a book written by someone else.
Oh, really?
And that is really lovely too.
Oh,
Um, and it's really is something that is intensely pleasurable
yeah,
personally.
yeah,
And so I think that if people do that, and they don't have to have been published, but they will have been writing for a long time,
yeah,
and as kids or whatever. And it's always a pleasure to go back to it and to reread it and to feel again that impulse that
yeah,
drove you to put those words down on paper.
exactly. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, I feel so inspired by all that. And so I know
Oh,
lots of
good.
other
I'm
people
so
will
glad.
too. Wow, that's
Yeah.
really terrific. Um, I, I'd love to talk. So you've sort of spoken about, how you get an idea, how
Mm.
you write a book and your process and your researching process. I'm curious to know more towards the end of it when you're getting it prepared to be submitted. Are
Yep.
you drafting many times and then sending it to your agent? Does she give editorial input? Does it go back and forth, or do you sort of get it as as best as it can be, and then your agent sends it out automatically, or you have a conversation about where to send it? I'm just curious about that process of finishing a book, sending to your agent, sending it to a publisher. Can you talk a little about what that is like, that
Sure.
experience?
Sure. So the way I write is, okay, I write often a chapter a day, occasionally two chapters a day. Depends, what sort of mood I'm in and how the chapter's going. And then the next day, what I do is I reread over what I've read written a day before, because sleeping on it often makes you see things that might eat. And so
Yeah.
I tweak it, and then I go on to the next chapter, and it goes on like this. So I'm actually revising as I'm going along, if you know what I mean,
Right.
rewriting. And then at the very end, when it's finished, and I write right till the end, I always write chronologically. In every chapter, from chapter 1 right up to whatever, chapter 27 or whatever. And then at the very end, I read it. And you know what I've started doing, which is really quite strange in a way, because I wasn't doing this before, but I will always send like I always save stuff religiously, but I also send it to myself to another email address, and so that I've always got a backup in case the computer fails, the USB fails,
Yeah.
everything fails. And then when I've finished it, I actually open that on my phone, would you believe? And I sit down on the sofa and I read it through as if it was a book. Because somehow I find that being on the screen with all the busy little bits around it makes it more distracting,
That's
and I don't
interesting.
see as much. It's almost like I read so fast that I'm going scroll, 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 scroll,
Yeah.
scroll. But um, it jumps out at me like it would jump out at you from the printed page.
Yeah.
Now, generally speaking, they don't send you a printed proof even, anymore. They used to. Um, but anyway, so when I've done that, and I go back to my computer and I fix the things that have jumped out at me from the phone screen version, and then I will send it to my agent, and ask her if she can have a quick look. With some of She doesn't look at all of them because I write so much and she has a lot
Right.
of clients, but with some she does read them extensively and then gets back to me with some of her comments and suggestions. She's a very, very good reader, obviously, and what she suggests is always on the money. And she's, because she loves reading for pleasure
Yeah.
as well. So she reads it like a book she's reading for pleasure. And then I also often give it to my husband to read at the time, because he's also a very good reader and very versatile reader. And so, but I never send them, either of them, incomplete manuscripts. I can't really do that. I do send at the beginning, my agent, I send her an outline and the first chapter. That is what she presents to the publisher. Occasionally, it's just an outline. So, with the Paris Cooking School, it was just an outline, which is very unusual because it was a completely different direction to what I've been doing in the past. So,
Yeah.
and very, very different sort of book. Anyway, but the editor loved it straight away. But we had a long conversation about it. So the publisher was involved from the beginning, talking about it editorially, and so was my agent. But that doesn't happen very often. So usually it's an outline and a first chapter. And from there, my agent will approach the publisher. She doesn't ask to read my actual manuscript first. She knows that I will have a complete manuscript,
Yeah.
and that I wouldn't tell her about the book until it was ready, sort of thing, generally speaking, or that I have a really good idea of what I'm doing and the publisher has worked with me before. So um, then, um, so then, of course, there's a lot of rewrites that happen when, after my first readers, and then with the publisher and the editor, etc. But it is, yeah, it's a I like it as a process. Like, the thing is, it's incredibly I love the process of having a book accepted. Obviously, just writing the outline and the sample chapter is a lot of fun, because especially something that I really want to do. It doesn't always get accepted, however. So sometimes I write these and then nothing happens. Um, and that's happened with a couple of books like that. But then I've repurposed them later, and Christmas Press published a couple that hadn't been taken up, but that have actually done quite well for
Yeah.
us, you know. So just their time had come or something
Yeah.
like that. Um,
So
and
never throw a story away.
no,
Yeah.
never ever
Yeah.
throw a story away. You never know when
Yeah.
it'll can be repurposed, and even when it can, in fact, become the starting block for something else.
Yeah.
Because you suddenly, after having not looked at it for ages, you look at it and you see something that you'd missed before, which you think, oh, if I go in that direction, maybe that will turn into something else. You know, if that, I mean, that's like the magic of it, isn't it?
Mm.
Um, but I love the way in the editing process and the rewriting process that this, it's like having, you've thrown everything at it, and you've got this lovely mass of marble where, which is a kind of an abstract sculpture,
Mm.
and then bits sort of start to shape and you actually have something truly beautiful, which is there. You know, I mean, that's a really nice feeling,
I love that
even if
image.
it's
Yeah.
hard work.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
great way to describe it. Wow. Well,
Mm.
that's so interesting to learn about. You'll often send the outline and first chapter up first and reading it on your phone screen. That's
Yeah.
really interesting techniques. I like those. I have to try that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, you know, the thing is that somehow reading it on the phone screen makes it look more impersonal, makes it look
Yeah, yeah.
less
Like it's not
busy.
you and yeah,
Yes, it's kind of weird because, you know, I'm just reading it on Word on the phone,
yeah,
but there's no little bobs and bits around it. It's
yeah,
just the page, you know, because if you want to edit, you've got to hit the screen to make it pop up.
yeah,
Otherwise, it doesn't pop up. And so you're just reading it like you're reading, like you would be reading a book on a digital thing, you know,
yeah,
Kindle or something like
yeah.
that. You know, so it is like, I don't own a Kindle. I've never liked them.
Mm.
I just feel that it's something else that's going to weigh down my handbag, which is heavy enough. And the phone, though, I found that much easier, funnily enough.
Mhm.
Um, so it's actually, yeah, they're little tricks, you know,
Yeah. Oh,
that can help you to see things in a different way.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, terrific. I um I wonder if there's anything you're currently working on or anything that's coming out next year or later in the future
Yep.
that you can tell us anything about.
Sure, yeah. So I've got a book, like as you know, I've got Secret Garden in Paris,
Yeah.
which is coming out in October. And I've got next year in March a book coming out with Walker Books. It's a middle grade novel called Bold Ben Hall,
Oh,
and it's back to my bushranging days. And because
fantastic.
yeah, Ben Hall is another of these bushrangers that I got really interested in. He's an unusual character, a sad, tragic life. I mean, so many of these guys, they died in their mid-20s, you know, and out violently. In poor Ben's case, he was riddled with bullets, like the most horrible thing, you know. And but his life story is really interesting. But his nemesis, you know, who actually died before Ben did, but in the same year, was a guy called Frederick Pottinger, Sir Frederick Pottinger, who was a chief police in the area where Ben came from in the central west of New South Wales. And he was a flamboyant character as well. I mean, the 19th century is full of flamboyant
Mm.
types. And, you know, he got into a lot of trouble too. He was a bit of a ne'er-do-well younger son, you know, from England, who was sort of turfed out to Australia to get him out of trouble in England. And he got a job as a trooper. And anyway, the two men are kind of like mirror images, but with totally different backgrounds, totally different lives. And yet their fates are not a million miles apart.
Mm.
And I just thought this is really interesting. And also, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting? And because bush rangers um, always, like Ned and Ben and people like that, they arouse different feelings in people. You know, some people think they're absolute heroes, some people they say they're absolute villains,
Yeah.
others think they're somewhere in between, which is what I think. You know, they're somewhere in between. And So in my story, so it starts off in Canowindra, in the Central West historical town of Canowindra, where Ben Hall and his mates held up um, a whole town and had a 3-day party. The river was in flood; nobody could pass through. There was only one policeman whom they locked in his cell, and they proceeded to take over the pub. Get anyone who arrived there was immediately told they couldn't go on their journey; they had to stay in the pub. They paid for everything, amazingly enough. They paid for the whole thing, so they paid for this 3-day party, and then they took off. And so in my story, the girl who is one of the main characters, she's arrived there with her parents who are actors, the traveling players. I love the traveling players because you can get them into all sorts of situations. And there was a lot of traveling players around at the time, you know, who used to visit regional towns and stuff and put on shows. And so they've arrived here in Canowindra and they're held up like with all the others. And meanwhile, you know, in Forbes, which is another town in the Central West, this boy called Sam, he's a stable boy and he dreams of becoming a Cobb and Co coach driver because they were like the Ferraris, the fast vehicles of the time, you know, and they are enormous vehicles. I don't know if you've ever been to the Cobb and Co Museum in Toowoomba, but it's
Yes.
well worth going to.
Yes.
It's amazing. And just when you see the coach and you're standing next to it and you think, my God, imagine one of them thundering down the street towards you, you know, pretty scary and the drivers were very skilled and it was like a real thing, you know. You had a bit of pizzazz if you were a Cobb and Co driver. But he's also idolizes Frederick Pottinger. So eventually the two meet and they have this thing of, you know, no, Ben is in the right, no, Fred is in the right, you know, sort of thing. So they have this whole thing around who's right, who's wrong, etc. So it's an adventure, but it's also a bit of a reflection on the whole thing. Why did people become bushrangers? What were the complexities of the whole thing, you know, but told within a story that is a lot of fun and that has a lot of things going on in it. So that's coming out in March. And then I've got a secret work in progress, which I'm working on at the moment, but which is going to be another adult novel. But I also have another secret squirrel idea for a children's novel, so which is possibly going to be a historical one at this stage, although I have completely made up my mind about that. It's still agitating in the back there without finding its final form. So yeah, and I've got a picture book coming out with Lorena as well, and with Midnight Sun again, and it's another poetic semi-fairy tale story called The Giant, and Lorena's done the most magnificent illustrations for it. I think that's going to be coming out in the middle of the year. So yeah, there's quite a lot on.
So much to look forward to. I'm
Thank
itching
you.
for that Ben Hall one. That sounds
Yeah,
fantastic. And everything else.
yeah,
That'll all be great.
yeah.
We're very nearly out of time, so I'd like to
Yep.
just end briefly on the final question, which I ask each writer that I chat with. And that is, if there is a time capsule to be opened in 100 years, which three Sophie Masson books would you put
Oh
into
my
that
goodness.
capsule to give future generations an idea of who you
Wow.
are as a writer?
That is so hard, Brenton. That is the hardest question you asked.
Very tricky.
I really find it very hard to say, but and because you know it changes. So if time capsule number one
Yeah.
with three would be the Paris Cooking School, the Hunt for Ned Kelly, and Fire in the Sky, for various reasons. If you know you had to have an alternative option, capsule number two would have Saturn, would have Winter in France, which is a book I love, and would also have Moonlight and Ashes. So
Yeah.
those are just two possible capsules.
Yeah.
But it is the hardest thing because so many. And, it's a bit like there were things like, for instance, I was thinking, we had at one point there was like back in 2019 when there was a big drought here, the worst drought ever. And there was, for the first time, in a long time, big bushfire risk. And, you're told you should have things ready to packed to go, and including treasures and stuff. And I looked at all my books and I thought, how am I going to take them all? I mean, like the books that I've written myself, and which books would I be able to easily find again so that I could sacrifice the poor things to the flames? But which books am I never going to be able to find, again? So it was like this thing of, this agony of trying to decide
Yeah.
which book to put in that particular capsule. Yeah.
Well, so many wonderful ones to choose from, and I know it's a bit mean of me to ask. It's a very good question, but I think it's always interesting to see what people
It
select,
is.
and I think you've made
Yeah.
some great selections.
Yeah.
We're
Thank
about
you.
to be out of time, so I just want to say, Sophie, thank you so much for coming on the vlog. I'm so honored to have you on KidLit Corner, and I enjoy so many of your books, and it sounds like we've got so many more yet to come to enjoy. A
Thank you
Secret
so much,
Garden in
Brenton. And
Paris is Sophie Beaumont, under the Sophie Beaumont name,
yes,
is coming out later this month. And her latest children's book, Sabina and the Cats of Rome, are out now. So I'll give a quick plug to those. Um, but it's one definitely that you'll all enjoy. Thank you so much for coming on, Sophie.
thank you so much, Brenton. And may I say that you say you're honored to have me on your blog, but I'm honored to be there. So it's
Oh,
been
thank
lovely
you.
chatting with you, and it's wonderful to meet someone like you, who's so knowledgeable and understanding of children's literature and so enthusiastic, and who I'm sure we'll hear a lot more of, creatively speaking, as well. So
Oh,
thank you.
that means so much. I hope you're right.
Yes, I'm sure I am.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sophie. That means so much.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.